Okay, here we go. NIO has released a phone and Mr. Market has not rewarded it so far. But in this video, I will tell you how I personally think about it as a NIO investor, more from the analytics side, and why I think if you invest in NIO right now, you'll get the phone for free. And whenever I have the time, I want to go a little bit deeper. And this video won't be a marketing presentation or repeating the news about what NIO phone specs are and so on. No, instead I prepared a couple of slides and talking points, like for example about the cost, its impact on the NIO business and so on, and its opportunities in the future. So if you enjoy that, please watch it till the very end, and also smash a like. That helps to get this video in front of more people. And for the new viewers of this channel, please hit the subscribe button so you won't miss out on any videos in the future. And now let's jump into the topics. So I like to start with the prejudice and one of the key arguments against NIO Phone, which is that it's a cash burn and a distraction for the business model, which personally I don't think it is. And I'm hearing that one very often, but maybe throughout this presentation it becomes more clear what I think is the perspective and the strategy with that from NIO perspective, because I mentioned in the intro that if you are buying NIO stock today, you basically get the phone for free. And what I'm meaning by that is that the complaints around that NIO phone costs a lot of money is actually kind of looking in the back view mirror, because the R&D for this phone has largely been already paid off. It's very likely that this is already in the balance sheet of NIO, and partly the reason why NIO has such high R&D cost and is investing quite a bit of money. That was actually reiterated by Li Bin on the stage and saying that, NIO is going here on a long-term perspective and wants to achieve a high return on invest in the long run, but not in the short term. By the way, it's one part of the NIO business model aspect that because they're not owning and investing in their factory, all of this capex can actually be spent elsewhere. And part of that is in the area of marketing and ecosystem activities. And that kind of brings me to my next point about NioLife, where I think NIO Phone should be kind of seen as something within NioLife, because what's the potential of NIO is not only in the area of how many cars they're selling, but also the services and e-commerce functionalities. You heard me in previous videos going as far as saying that they could compete with Alibaba. And with that, not only do I mean that NIO could be one of the largest market caps of Chinese companies overall, but also playing a big role in the area of cross-border e-commerce. And this is where even some of the biggest companies like Tencent and Alibaba have been struggling with the globalization and going into other countries, especially in affluent, high net worth individuals as a target group. So Alibaba, when it comes to cross-border e-commerce, has been riding mostly this low-level, low-cost target group especially, and has been successful in a couple of countries and in some different areas. However, not really in a way where it's attracting huge and big brands like the European established brands. Unfortunately, many of them are still quite unsuccessful when it comes to online commerce and cross-border e-commerce between China and Europe, for example. And how I like to think about NIO Phone is that it's kind of ticking off one check mark in my assumptions about investing in NIO, which is about the fact that they can create their own products and new items and sell them to an affluent user base, certainly in China, but possibly on a global level. And if NIO Phone is kind of a success, then I think this can actually be a validation of the business model assumption here that, for example, I have in my business case. And while it's still very, very early, for example, if we look at the other sales breakdown of NIO, it's still possibly driven by something like the NIO Power incomes and so on, and not so much by the real e-commerce and NioLife revenues, right? But still, the NIO Phone actually is one of the first big products that I see here entering the stage. And although it's mainly aimed at existing NIO car users, and let's say maybe 10% will adopt it, still this has the potential to generate millions, maybe hundreds of millions in revenue for NIO. And so while some people are arguing they want NIO to focus on the car itself and just, churn out cars and sales, I actually want to see more of that. I want to see NIO engaging with brands, creating their own brands and sell more different types of products into their user base, because I think this is what's reflecting NIO's key business model. Now, going to talk a little bit about this NIO flywheel and monetization options later, but first let me give you a couple of key understandings here. What we're looking at here is the classical business model, a pipeline business. Basically, legacy OEMs are doing that. They have a product, they're producing it, and then they're shipping it to consumer. It's one unit in the pipeline going through one transaction, and that's the main business model of traditional auto companies. Tesla is also very much focused at this one, while technology playing a larger role and enabling also different kind of business models on top of that. However, I think this is what most people have in mind when they look at NIO and when they're investing in NIO, whereas personally I am looking at NIO rather as a platform business model that is trying to facilitate transactions and interactions and value creations between different entities within the ecosystem, rather than just churning out cars and focusing on just selling one product through a pipeline. And I spoke about this before. This is kind of coming from a e-commerce and even more social commerce kind of thinking that I think is inherent to Libin, and where I think NIO is actually headed, which is that they are looking to increase the average value of each of the transactions, the margin and thereby profitability of each of these transactions, and super importantly, the average customer lifespan. So this customer lifetime value is the key metric for NIO to watch, and this is coming from an e-commerce and an ecosystem platform business model kind of viewpoint. And so that's very, very different, and this is why NIO is engaging in such activities like bringing out phones. And if we're looking at companies that have established strong ecosystems like Apple, we can see what are the consequences of that and why NIO is, I think, going for this model, which is that at some point, the shipped devices, which is kind of a straight line here, is decoupling from the revenues, which are growing much higher for service offered of this ecosystem. So the units shipped, which in this case would be the cars, but also the phones, are actually not as much important as the whole revenue generated by the whole ecosystem in the case of Apple. And so I think this is one of the inherent reasons why NIO is launching a phone, in addition, of course, to offering a better user experience and also having an edge over competition. But that's just one of the key factors coming along with it. And one more validation that I see here of this business model by NIO here with the launch of the phone is actually the pricing. So what we're looking at here is the price ranges of different phone models, including, for example, the iPhones, which are some of the highest priced models out there, as you can see in the very top corner. And then this black line here is the average Android average sales prices. So you can see that this is quite low. Of course, we know Android phones are usually going more into the mass market, and NIO's phone is also based as an Android phone, right? However, if we watch the NIO pricing, it's between the $800 and $1,200 segment here, depending on the configuration and so on. And that's sitting nicely in this similar area where, for example, some of the most important iPhone models are being offered. And the fact that NIO as a new brand brings out a model, a new product and a model of a smartphone that is actually sitting in this area, possibly having a quite high margin because of that, this, in my view, could be a validation of where NIO is heading in case that NIO Phone becomes a success. Because that's one of the strengths of what NIO has built already so far. They have a huge network of a user base of around 400,000 car owners and millions of app users, and those are largely affluent users. And if we take the analogy of the Apple service system here, they will have a much higher likelihood of monetization through services and software in the future. And so the NIO Phone could actually establish this sort of a NIO flywheel, at which this phone both helps to grab the attention of possibly people who are not owning a NIO car yet. For example, if a NIO owner with a NIO Phone is somewhere. People will start asking about this phone. They get to know about NIO brand, get possibly interested, and at some point may actually convert into an e-commerce buyer in the app or even a car buyer, and then starting to experience the whole ecosystem and the car itself and its hardware and its digital service experience level here. And so these are the transactions that I'm talking about, which NIO likes to create many more of at different touch points and at different stages in the lifetime of the user. And that is driven by a high user satisfaction. That's what Li Bin said also as a main point why they are creating the NIO Phone. It's enabling different use cases. It's enabling a better car experience, a better connectedness, a couple of new features and so on. I'm not going to walk you through all of these features right now because that's not the purpose of the video, but what is going to happen is if this user satisfaction is strong and high, then more and more users will actually refer new members, and that's where the wheel is closing, and this is what ultimately drives user acquisition and where you can basically understand NIO Phone as a marketing tool. It helps to lift the brand value as more people are getting satisfied with the interactions. It helps to establish the positioning as a player in the automotive field which has more to offer, a better satisfaction rate, a better experience, and that's my key point here. It's born out of a more holistic platform business model thinking here. Because, and that again also became clear in the keynote again by Li Bin, NIO by now has a very complex setup of the ecosystem, of the different parts that are playing a role in that. By the way, I will do more deep dive video on that. I'll also publish English subtitled videos of the whole more than 2 hours of video that has been filmed off the NIO Tech Day for my Patreon community, which by the way helps to sponsor this channel here. And if you want to become a patron, then just follow the link at patreon.com/dongxi and you will get an invite into the network where you get such kind of extra content and also a community to discuss daily. And so in a nutshell here, in the short term, yes, people are right. This has created quite a bit of overhang in terms of R&D cost. However, I quite like the fact that 70% of the R&D personnel in this regard for NIO Phone is actually working on software, because again, this coming from the ecosystem thought and software as a key to connect the car with other devices and services, bringing NoMe out of the car, having an improved software ecosystem. This is a direct consequence of this effort of investing into this R&D efforts for creating a phone. And in my personal opinion, it will benefit the company down the road when it comes to decoupling revenue growth from unit sales growth, like I mentioned before with the Apple example. And in the meantime, it's largely a tool for user satisfaction and marketing, and could create marketing and brand spillover effects that are attracting new users. That's why buying NIO stock today would be a call option on the potential that this NIO Phone is contributing into this ecosystem in the long term, just the way I have described it, and benefiting NIO in the return on investment over time through all of these aspects that I've pointed out here, which I possibly could go much deeper in future videos. So let me know in the comments whether or not you agree with my take here. Thanks for watching and see you in my next one.